All right, it's 9:01. I don't want to wait anymore. If anyone is rolling in a little bit late, they've got plenty of time to catch up. And I do want to make sure we have time for our panel here in just a little bit. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Project Success Summer Institute on Inclusive Practices in Action. We are so excited to be with you, although it's virtually, but we're really looking forward to continuing our work together on improving student outcomes. So for our kickoff session this morning, we have a great panel with us to share their experiences with connecting academics and functional living skills in school and beyond. But before we get to that, I have just a few housekeeping notes to take care of. If you could please stay muted with your video turned off during our presentations today, that'll make sure that there's enough bandwidth for everyone to participate. There will be designated opportunities throughout the sessions and or at the end of the sessions where you're welcome to unmute and ask questions. And you're also encouraged to ask questions or share your comments in the chat box throughout the presentation. We do really want to hear from you. We are recording this session and it will be available for viewing via YouTube at the conclusion of the Summer Institute, and you'll get an email about how to access those recordings later. If you registered directly for the Summer Institute using our Google form registration, you'll get that follow-up email with information on how to access those recordings and other materials. All the presentation slides, the related materials are currently available for viewing on our website, which is projectsuccessindiana.com. It's real small at the bottom of this slide that we're looking at here now, and you'll see it again here in a minute. And that's where the session recordings will be housed as well. Last thing, don't forget to fill out an evaluation at the end of each session today. The link will be shared in the chat box at the end of the presentation. Our team really values your input and we use it to improve our future offerings. And I know that the other presenters will appreciate your feedback as well. You can stay anonymous when you're completing the evaluation if you wish, or you can enter your email address if you're looking to receive professional growth points or a certification of professional development hours. Other than that, you can leave your email address off and remain anonymous on that evaluation. All right, enough of that. Here is a look at my plan for this first session. I'm going to share just some brief introductions and information about the Project Success Resource Center, as well as a short overview of this year's Summer Institute. And then we'll get right into our panel of expert educators sharing their experiences with connecting academics and functional living skills in school and beyond. I really am going to try to speed through this first part because I want to leave as much time as possible for our panel. But I'll share my email address at the end of this presentation. So if I go too fast or if you have any questions really at all, don't hesitate to email me. And we've also got the Project Success team on this call as well, monitoring the chat box for any immediate questions or any assistance you might need. So feel free to share out in the chat box as well. So for introductions, my name is Ashley Quick, and I've been with Public Consulting Group for 4 years now. Before that, I was a special education teacher for just about 10 years. But now I spend most of my time coaching teachers through the Project Success Resource Center, which you'll hear more about in just a bit. Our team enjoys showing off our families during our presentations. So this is a picture from a recent beach trip with my husband, Tony, and our almost 10-year-old twins, Aaliyah and Jackson. Can't believe it. If you've been with Project Success for a while, you've probably seen those kiddos grow up right before your eyes, and now they're almost 10. I also want to introduce you to the rest of the Project Success team, our director, Meredith Keaty-Merck, project advisor, Amy Howie, subject matter expert, Heidi Brett Baker, project specialist, Mary Baker Budisa, and project manager, Christine Krieger. They are all on this call this morning, so please feel free to reach out to any one of us with questions. We encourage you today to share your experiences with the Summer Institute on social media and tag us if you have interesting tidbits or shout outs to presenters that you enjoyed, quotes from certain presentations, or next steps that you'd like to share. Really anything that highlights your experience with the Summer Institute, we'd love for you to share that and tag us on social media. So you can find us on Twitter, Project Success 4. And on Facebook, if you search for Project Success IN, since we are based in Indiana, you will find us there. Many of you are already familiar with Project Success as a resource center, but for those of you who aren't, just a little bit about us. We are a resource center that supports increasing outcomes for students with significant disabilities by supporting teachers and leaders in implementing inclusive practices, why we're here today, and providing high quality instruction. So what we do is provide professional development across really a variety of topics in a number of formats, which you can see here on this slide. And we'll have some more information available at the end of this presentation where you can learn more about upcoming opportunities from us as well. Just know that although we view things as project success, we view things primarily through the lens of students with more significant disabilities. Everything that we talk about today in terms of inclusive practices really is applicable to all students, to any students, regardless of the level of or type of disability that they might have. If you joined us for last summer's Institute on building inclusive teams, this slide should look familiar to you. This is our inclusive practices framework, and this year we'll be building on the knowledge and the information that we shared last year at last summer's Institute, where we reviewed this framework, but we also looked at a lot of different tools and strategies so that local teams could be able to work through this framework and then implement inclusive practices in their building or in their district. And so this year we'll be building on that and really be looking at what do some of those inclusive practices look like in action. I included at the bottom of this slide a link to a good article, How to Include Students with Disabilities in General Education in 4 Easy Steps. It's not quite that easy, but it is a good article that essentially aligns with and somewhat summarizes our inclusive practices framework. So I thought that would be a good resource for you. Just a reminder, all these presentations from the Summer Institute are available on our website. So anytime you see a hyperlink there, you will be able to access those resources. All right, to take things just a step further with this year's Summer Institute, these are our objectives. Supporting educators with the implementation of inclusive practices to improve outcomes for all students, especially those with significant disabilities, and making the content as hands-on and easily accessible as possible, providing plenty of examples of inclusive practices in action, along with tools and resources that are easy for educators to implement moving forward. At the conclusion of the Institute, you'll receive a follow-up email with information on how to access the recordings, session materials, and things like that. But there will also be a link to an overall evaluation, a short overall evaluation, where we'd like to know how closely we met your expectations in covering these objectives. So keep these objectives in mind as you participate in sessions throughout today. I told you you'd be able to see our website again. Here it is, projectsuccessindiana.com. If you click on the Events tab, you will then, from that drop-down, you'll select Conferences, which will take you to this page. If you select Summer Institute 2021 from the drop-down menu under Regional Trainings, because the Institute used to be an in-person regional training back in pre-COVID days, make sure to click Go after you've selected that. Then you will come to this page where you'll be able to scroll down and access all the presentations and other resources from the Summer Institute. Without further ado, I'm so glad that didn't take me very long, and I hope everyone's still with me. I'm so excited for this educator panel. Let me quickly introduce our panelists, and then we'll get right into hearing about their experiences. So this morning, we have joining us Erica, Amy, Megan, Jill, and Jenna. And these are expert teachers that we have worked with over the years from various schools throughout the state of Indiana, who really have some great insights and experiences to share, and things, strategies and things that they have found to be useful and beneficial in their experiences. And so we will move through a series of questions that we will pose to the group, and anyone on the panel can sort of share their thoughts, their ideas. We'll hear from everyone if they have something to share, and then we'll move on to the next question. If you, as a participant, have questions for the panelists, please feel free to put them in the chat box, and we may not get to all of them, but we will certainly try to address your questions as well as the ones that we've already prepared here. So I'm going to give our panelists just a moment to unmute so that they can be ready, or stay muted if you want to, I guess. Maybe you have background noise, I don't know. But be ready, I guess. There's the signal. We're ready to get started. All right. Here's the first question, panelists. How does inclusion in the general education setting facilitate student learning of both academics and functional living skills? when we're thinking through that lens of our students with more significant disabilities, of course, in the past, it was primarily we were focusing on functional living skills. The movement lately has been that we are looking at the alternate academic achievement standards, bringing more and more academics to our students with significant disabilities. So how does inclusion in the gen ed setting facilitate learning in both of those areas?
I can go first. When I think of how it facilitates both academics and functional living skills, my kids, for the most part, are integrated or included in general education throughout the day for core classes. As I have, I hate to say like higher students, but right now I don't have as low functioning students as some may. So we're able to be in the classes and they learn their functional living skills like socially. I mean, they are with the gen ed kids and they are put in groups with them. And it's been amazing to see how well they fit in. Once in a while, you see the kid, oh man, but they still work with them and they still do a really good job. And so I think we've spent a lot of time that way socially. I still do, each of my kids is in my classroom once a day for functional living in one way or another. But yeah, that's how I've seen it. It's just the interaction and learning some of those social skills that way.
Great, thanks, Jenna. Erica, how about you?
I would agree with Jenna, and I've got kids that are both easier, like higher functioning, easier to blend in with their peers than some of my lower functioning kiddos. But even the lower functioning kiddos are picking up social cues and things better because they're seeing those examples from their peers, whether they're good examples or not so good examples. And we have to go, well, okay, see, that student just did something that they weren't supposed to do. And this was the consequence that was because of that. Instead of me having to come up with a random scenario for them to kind of understand those situations, they're getting to see it in person. And then also just the overall friendships and outside social interactions that have increased that functional living skills have been amazing. And then the academics are just soaring because of those social interactions. I mean, I've got a couple of kiddos that I swear I would not know half of the student body just because these kiddos are introducing me to every kid that we walk down the hallway and see. All of the staff stop and make sure. I'm like, no, we've got to be on time to get to class, like just like everyone else. Like, but they wanted to ask me a question. I go, they can ask you later, buddy. We got to go. You know, like still having those functional skills in there, but they're social butterflies where they, you know, before we're like, well, I only want to talk to the people that I know. Now they know everyone. And so that's pretty exciting to see.
I love that. So we've heard so far that the benefits, especially with the functional living skills, that those still can be learned even when students are in the gen ed setting, right? I think traditionally sometimes we've had the mindset that, you know, we have to have them separate because we're not teaching functional living skills in the gen ed classroom, but of course we are, right? Just by living the experience. And so both of you, Jenna and Erica, you're spot on by saying, you know, they're seeing their peers and they're learning from them and picking up those cues and things. So I think I think you both shared some pretty key pieces in that point. And then two, I'd like to hear more from the panel on the academic side as well. So how does the inclusion of students in the gen ed setting impact or facilitate the student learning of academics in a way that perhaps maybe you wouldn't have thought it would otherwise?
I'll go on that one. I have a few that are pushed out into actual gen ed courses for their academics, whether they're taking it for a grade or if they're taking it for a pass fail unit, they still get that academic piece They might not master the content, but they're at least exposed to it. I've noticed that a few students have brought back what they're learning in their other classes to my classroom and brought topics back that we've not even discussed or hit on due to ability levels. But we also have students that one in particular, we were able to get into a vocational. She's going to the cosmetology vocational with general education peers. She's auditing the program, but she's still getting that academic piece. She's still learning how to hold a job in the community. She's doing clerical work. So I think both it's the social aspect, but also the academic pieces that they still bring it back to my classroom and can have those discussions and what they're learning outside of my classroom. So I think it's a mixture of both in my experience.
I love that. Thank you, Megan, for sharing that. And I think that's a really good point that sort of illustrates a broader point that we see more recently in thinking about educating students with more significant disabilities, which is that it's often not a lack of ability, but a lack of opportunity that is affecting their outcomes, right? Certainly having a significant disability impacts a lot of things about, the way that student carries out their life. But if we automatically then restrict their opportunities based on what we see their disability, doing or having that impact on them, then we'll never know for sure what they're capable of. So for your student who's able to get out in that vocational program, I mean, that's an opportunity that she may not have had otherwise, right? If we just went off of her sort of identification of her disability. So I think that's something that the whole team here would want you to take away from Inclusive Practices in Action this year, that it's often not a lack of ability, but a lack of opportunities. And so then we want to look at how can we facilitate those opportunities in a way that makes sense and in a way that is, I don't want to say easy because it's not going to be easy, but in a way that doesn't create unnecessary work for everyone involved, but really working together to bring everyone involved in helping that happen. There are some questions in the chat box. So what does a day look like for your students who are included in a gen ed setting? And then another question is, how are your students impacted academically? So if there's, my guess would be, for instance, how does their instruction perhaps differ from the gen ed instruction, even if they're in the setting, or how is it the same? Or maybe what accommodations or modifications are made, just what does academics look like when it's taking place in the gen ed setting? Anyone want to share about those thoughts?
I can jump in here. I'm actually sharing the conference room with one of the teachers that I collaborate with right now. What I do is I have many students that go out and they will go out for their gen ed classes, some with support and some without support from special education services. Those that go out with support, the assistant will collaborate with me and with the gen ed teacher to make sure that we're providing the appropriate accommodations and modifications. For some students that might just be that they have, somebody extra in the room to make sure that they are contained within the room. Because that might be a student that we're just trying to get them there to be socially a part of the setting, and then they're just absorbing what's going on in the setting. Other students are doing the similar activities as what is going on in the classroom, and then we are accommodating the activity, whether we're changing it to have less choices or making it hands-on when it's a written activity, and making it a matching or a picture activity for them, or they're dictating to the computer, or they're dictating to a person, or they're just talking it out with a classmate or a staff member. We have some that are there and they do listen to the entire lesson and activity, and have the materials. For our school district, we have Snap and Read and Co-Writer for all students. So they're able to have all of the materials read to them, whether an adult is there or not. And they can, utilize that skill. And then we can bring that back during their time when they're in class, and then we reteach what they've already learned. And then they have a different assignment than what was provided in class, but the teacher and I collaborate to work on what that assignment looks like. So they're still getting the same intention as to what the assignment was after, but then we collaborate to see, okay, what's really important that we're trying to go after here for this student, and what is the intent behind the activity at this point for them.
Great. I like that. Thanks, Erica. We had someone in the chat box also mention that they feel like they do a pretty good job of including their students who are functioning a little more closely to grade level or age level, but are curious about what it might look like for students who are truly on that most significant end of the spectrum of students with significant disabilities. What does that look like? Do you still include your students in general education at that point? What does it look like? What are the expectations like for them? Just any thoughts or experiences that you've had with those students?
I can jump in.
Any panelists? Yeah.
I have one student that is lower functioning, and he is in I think of world history is kind of was his core class for the year. And he had a para with him at least 3 days a week. I had one that worked every other day. So and he would listen and absorb the material, and then the teacher was really good about giving him like an alternative project, or we have the attainment curriculum that the teacher would be like, okay, this chapter or whatever unit is what we're talking about this week. So read this to him, share it with him, and then he can take the quiz, which is pictures along with the questions. And that seems successful for him. So that's one thing we did. And then for the most part, he participated in like art, or the art teacher would just give him another assignment, finger painting, or just an alternative to kind of make it work. The parent would be with him also there. So
I'm hearing, but now, I'm sorry, now and sort of throughout our conversation so far, I'm hearing a lot of strategies that seem to align with universal design for learning as a way that is really enabling these students to be involved in the general education setting. Would you agree? And then I guess my next point would be too, I heard mention of what did you say? I think you said like soaking it up, right? Like the student is in the classroom and sort of soaking it up. If you've ever attended a project success training before, you know that we talk at length about the idea of exposure versus mastery of content. So when we're talking about including students in the gen ed setting, we're not automatically then saying we expect mastery of that content. But what's really important to focus on there is the exposure to the content. And again, that goes back to the idea of making sure that they have opportunity, right? If we don't expose them to the content, we'll never know what they might be capable of learning or sort of implementing from that. So I just wanted to sort of call that out, that regardless of the sort of significance of the impact of a student's disability on their ability to function in general education or learn that general education content, the exposure piece, if nothing else, is critical, because at some point there could come a time where they're able to put together a piece and another piece and another piece that they've sort of gathered from all these opportunities of just being there to soak it in. And it may be after they leave you, right? It may be when they've moved on to another teacher, but we don't know what outcomes could come from planting all these seeds. And so even if it feels a little defeating, or I don't want to say pointless, but you're not really understanding the impact of having students participate in general education if they're not able to sort of quote unquote keep up with the other students. Think about it as planting seeds, and think about it as you really are wanting to focus on that exposure for that student, exposing them to the same content, the same ideas, the same settings, the same peers as the other students get that exposure to. And mastery comes later, right? We're worried about exposure, and then we can be really intentional about deciding what out of all that content we want them to master. Any last thoughts on this question? We've got other great questions too, so don't worry.
Well, and I think that goes back to kind of what I said when I was saying some kids were just containing to the room.
Sure.
Making sure that they're within the setting. Because I've got some kids that just want to wander around. I have teachers that are perfectly fine with, okay, they're here. Let them listen. They're gathering it.
Yep.
You know, but I got somebody there that's making sure that they're there and they're exposed to the information, and it's a different voice and a different setting than what I could say. And I could be saying the same thing, but they're picking it up from somebody else. And they're hearing something else, or they're seeing a different visual than what I have shown them, or they're hearing something completely different than something I have exposed them to. Yep. So they're just that, you know, additional exposures. And sometimes it's those non-academic areas that start it for those more severely impacted students.
Sure.
I have some students that were starting with lunch because the families are scared to death. I mean, right now, COVID is kind of like killing my inclusion for some kiddos. Sure. But just being in the cafeteria with other kids was a huge step for some kids and their parents. You know, that was a big step. And then once they got through that and their parents were like, they didn't flip out in the cafeteria with all those kids and all that noise. And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
You know, like then I go, okay, now we're going to do this class. Now we're going to do this class. They love doing this in the room. Now we're going to try this.
Yeah. I think that's another really good point too. You know, when we're talking about the importance of inclusion, we don't necessarily mean 100% inclusion all the time, right? Just get them in gen ed no matter what for the whole day, because that wouldn't necessarily make sense for every student either, right? The fact that you're intentional about, well, let's just try lunch. And for some students, that might be the worst place to start, right? You have to know your student. But for some students, at least, where there are zero academic expectations and it's just lunch and you're with your peers, that's great. And then you build on that, right? Whereas for another student, lunch could certainly be far too overwhelming. Maybe you start with a smaller setting that is an academic setting that has more structure to it, and then you adjust your expectations for what they get out of it academically at that point. But starting small is part of our framework, right? Our inclusive practices framework, where you don't just throw yourself into all of it and hope it works. You start small and then build on your successes. So I think that's a really good point, Erica. Thank you for that. I am going to move on to the next question, which all these questions are similar, right? They're related. So I don't think that it'll take us too far off course from what we've been talking about already. But this question is more about the instruction. So how do you leverage the expertise of general educators or instructional coaches, if you have them, to address both academics and functional living skills with your students? So this really gets to the heart of, as special educators, many of us were not trained in all the content that general educators were trained in. And now that we are having increased academic expectations for our students with more significant needs, the special educators are going, what am I supposed to do with all this? I can't be all things to all kids all the time in all subject areas, right? So how do you leverage the expertise of the general educators that you work with to address both academics and functional living skills with your students?
I'd like to take this one if I could.
Sure.
So I teach at Penn High School, and for the past 13 years, I have networked with the science teachers, whether it's been biology or oceanography or space science, wherever I can get my hands on some of that great equipment and some of those materials that lend themselves to hands-on activities, especially in addressing some of those SEPS goals. And then, of course, the content connectors. And they've been very generous with, giving me polymers. Hey, why don't you make some snow? Or here's the earthquake machine, or their tornado simulator, the augmented reality sandbox, and those sort of things. And so that has been awesome that they've not only shared their materials, but their expertise. It's one thing to have access to this, this kind of, education, but I haven't been trained on using these materials. And so they've stepped back on not only how to use it, but when to use it, and, how to include problem solving strategies and student engagement to really provoke that highest level of achievement or learning possible. For the past year, we've really been focused on co-teaching and moving into that co-teaching scenario, so that I won't have my self-contained science classes, that I will co-teach with other educators. And so I've joined the Biology PLC, where I have attended most of the meetings where we discuss the standards, and we make common assessments and rubrics and those sort of things. And in the process, a couple of staff members and I updated the curriculum map that I made a few years back with the Project Success training. And although I thought it was a good product, I just didn't have the science expertise that these trained biology and science teachers had. And so one of the things that we did was we went through that biology curriculum map that I had made, and the science teachers helped unpack those so that they were more systematic, and they were just more in lines of how to address the science concepts and so forth. And then we'll use that and then really be able to hone in on identifying those supports that will be needed as we unpack those for students of all abilities in the co-teaching scenario next year.
Love that, Amy. Thank you. Sorry, I was waiting to see
Sure.
if anyone else was going to jump in. I also had my eye on the chat box, so
That's what I was doing as well. I just saw a couple of chats and I wanted to make sure that I addressed those. And I'm glad to see that there's collaboration with the other teams. I do want to expand. I noticed someone else said that there's collaborations across departments.
sure.
And we're doing that as well. We're actually creating this one-of-a-kind learning tool that's going to be a sensory-friendly space. We're creating a biology sensory wall within the biology PLC, where it will serve 900 plus students taking biology during their freshman year. So it'll be accessible to 900 plus students of all abilities. So it's going to be a portable rectangular cube that has slide out panels that are magnetic, dry erase, adhesive felt, and other sensory friendly materials. It'll be based on the biology standards and content connectors, and those are unpacked. It's going to be hands-on. We have teachers that are across content areas that are making puzzles for us. The OT has figured out ways to make them adapted so our students with less fine motor ability will be able to manipulate the pieces. We have students on the robotics team, the mission to engineer group specifically, that are going to work on switches and buttons for assistive technology aspects, so that all students will be able to, lend their voice and their thoughts while we're, using this for various topics. We've also had the manufacturing department 3D print some manipulative items for us. They've printed skulls, they've printed beaks for our evolution unit, and then those products in turn have gone down to the fine arts department, and then our advanced painting students have painted those, so they are very lifelike. So it's really been a great experience, one of which is being universally designed with the intent that it's going to be a learning tool for everyone. We have the visual impaired teacher that's going to be putting some braille on some items, speech and language and PT, and all those other domains have been involved. It's been a really phenomenal way to incorporate every gen ed teacher's expertise to help us teach science.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And one of the things that I heard throughout that is how many different people are involved in that, right? And also that in supporting your students with more significant needs, it isn't a separate thing that you're making just for them, but that it is available to everyone, right? Because whether a student has a disability identified or not, or whether, it impacts them more significantly or not, all students could potentially benefit from all of these different strategies and things that you're offering. So I love the focus on it being for all students, and that there isn't sort of gatekeeping, right? Well, you don't have this certain disability, so you don't get to go to the sensory room or use this tool or whatever. So those are the couple things that I took away from that for sure, is that it's for everyone, but it also involves everyone, right, on the adult side.
It is totally inclusive. We even have a shelf that slides out for students who perhaps are wheelchair bound. It's all ADA guidelines. So we are really designing this from the bottom up, and who best to do it than our engineers, right? And our robotics
Love
team.
that.
And so we are really making this tool a sensory friendly space for learning and accessible for everyone. And the portable part of it is we just didn't want it in a room, a designated area. This is going to travel from classroom to classroom, from large area instruction spaces to another. So it is really going to be a moving unit.
I love that. That's great. You're going to be getting some emails probably after this, like, tell me more. How do we do this? That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
That's great. Krista shared in the chat box that she has some students doing some projects with the agriculture class that they're growing their own tomato plants, and then they're planning to expand this year. So that's another way. I mean, that brings the functional living skills right to it, right? You may not start in, for instance, earth-based science class or whatever, algebra or trigonometry or something crazy like that, right? But agriculture, I mean, that's everybody can grow plants. So I think that's a great example of that. She would like to send out an email to all faculty about inclusion and having our students enjoy more opportunities. Does anyone have a template email they have used? Great question. So that was a follow-up from Krista, just about anyone here. If you have kind of wording or a template that you've used to reach out to colleagues in trying to expand inclusive opportunities. That's a really great question. If anyone has anything, feel free to pop it in the chat box, or you could email it directly to me and we can include it in our follow-up email. Thanks for asking that, Krista. That's really, really good question. I'm going to move to the next one, the next slide here, because it does include some of what we've already been discussing that Amy brought up in her answer. Primarily, who have you engaged along the way in addressing academics and functional living skills with your students? Clearly, Amy is bringing along the whole kit and caboodle, right, from her school. So many different experts in different areas, which is amazing. But to back up just a little bit, then the real thrust of this question is, how do you approach balancing the instruction of academic subjects and functional living skills? Because we all know that even for a student without an identified disability, getting all that content in, that academic content in a day is hard, right? It's a lot. And so then when you think about our students with more significant needs who have various accommodations and modifications that need to be made, other things that take out time from their day, how do you approach that balance of making sure that the academic content is taught, is instructed, but that you're also still spending time on the functional living skills as well? And then correlating to that would be just what's been most successful in your experience as far as making sure that that balance takes place, whether it's in your lesson planning, hearing a lot about the collaboration with stakeholders. So panelists, just talk to me a little bit about that and focus really on that idea of balancing. How do you make sure that those things are balanced for your students with the most significant needs?
I can start. I guess I have a lot of parents that get concerned about this, especially as we have, kind of made this shift, and they've maybe had older students that have gone through the schooling before, and now they have younger students coming up, and they're like, nope, I don't want this. Why are you making them do all this academics? I want them to focus just on functional skills. And I go, well, here's the thing. Functional skills will come within their academic lessons. And then I go, you gotta give me some time. You gotta let me try it. And usually by Christmas break of the first year or so, for most of the families, not all of them, but most of them, they're like, oh, I see what you're doing. Now, not every family, but most of them have seen, and it's been a collaboration with myself and our elementary teacher, because there's just two of us in our district, that we've been able to put all of this kind of together and see that tie for families, in that they're seeing everything coming together and seeing that the academics really are helping with the functional skills as well. and that we can see their functional skills as a part of their academic skills, you know, that we're tying it together. You know, just because we're saying it's academic time, we're still including the functional living skills within their academics. We're tying it into the lesson plans. We're tying those skills within, you know, like their math lesson. You know, we're including measurement. We're including, yes, it's still a standard, but the parents were like, no, they need to be cooking. They need to be doing this. They need to do that because they need to do that in life. And I go, do you have them help with supper? Well, no, they can't do it. And I'm like, have them help with one thing. Start with one thing. Oh, well, I guess I could. I go, yeah, you can. It'll be okay. It might be okay. Not every night. Just pick one night.
Right.
You know, and starting along the way that way, or, you know, let them pick out their clothes one day. I don't care if they look atrocious. You send extra clothes to school. Most times they come home in something different than what they came to school in. It's okay.
Right.
You know, like let them have a little choice in that. And they're like, oh, okay. It wasn't such a fight to get ready for school today. Like just
Sometimes
those
it's
little tiny things.
Sometimes it's supporting the families as much as the students, right? To open their eyes to it's okay to expand opportunities and provide exposure and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then just, you know, having that conversation with all staff, you know, that it's okay that they're not getting what's really going on, because it's like 2 months later that the kid's bringing up what you talked about in the fall lessons. And they're like, they really brought that up again. Yeah, that's so awesome that they brought up, you know, this lesson that we talked about way back when.
Yeah.
But it, you know, just continuing that collaboration and talking through everything takes a lot of time and creativity with how you collaborate with everyone. You know, there's one of me, and I don't know how many people I collaborate with all day long.
Right.
Everyone in the high school that any student goes and sees, because I don't limit where they go. Every kid has a different schedule, and we figure out how to make it work.
That's awesome. That's great. Thank you, Erica. We have just a few minutes left in this session, and I want to make sure that there's time for you all who are listening in to ask questions as well. So if you have questions for panelists, please be thinking about that. Enter those into the chat box, and we'll move on to this next slide here and then start to wrap up our discussion for today. But we do have just a little bit more time. I just wanted to make sure that participants had a chance to ask any additional questions in the chat box. So here's going to be sort of our last set of questions that I have today, which is, how are you panelists keeping high expectations and content connectors at the center of every decision, sort of instructionally speaking? And for those of you who are outside of Indiana, content connectors are what we call our alternate academic achievement standards. So wherever you see content connectors, just know we're talking about those alternate standards. So panelists, how are you keeping high expectations sort of front and center in these decisions that you're making? And then also thinking about those alternate standards, how does unpacking support the work that you do with both the academics and the functional living skills?
For me, at my school in Portage, we had high reliability school. That's our new ideology that we're following. So we're doing the collaboration as well. I'm sorry, one second. As well as teaching them the content connectors. My whole capstone was putting together a slideshow on what content connectors are, as well as doing it during our summer series development to teach other teachers in different departments what the content connectors are and how they can use it to support the students that they see and provide services to in the general education classes. I also started unpacking all the content connectors because I have to send in priority standards for all of the classes that I teach. So I've really been using those to really unpack those and use the project success templates to share out with all the teachers as well. So for I think it's 6 different topics that I teach in my self-contained classroom, I've been doing the content connectors and sending those to the different departments where they might be able to use or see a visual of what it looks like to unpack the templates for them as well.
That's great. Thank you, Megan. I appreciate the chaos in the background. I've got a little chaos myself going on, so
Sorry.
solidarity.
I'm sorry.
Nope, solidarity. That's great. Thank you. We have a few questions in the chat box. A couple of them are focusing specifically on literacy, so how you address literacy and reading with your students who have more significant needs, how you're addressing gaps that might come from either making sure that these students are included or in a co-taught setting. We've got one person asking about preschool strategies. So just to address that quickly, I would say things about preschool are not going to be that different from things about K through 5, 6 through 8, 9 through 12 plus, just as far as those key concepts of exposure versus mastery and keeping, making sure that we're not artificially restricting students' opportunities and things like that. Making sure there's a balance of functional and academics going on, things like that. But if anyone has anything else to add to that about preschool strategies, definitely add it in the chat box. Just wanted to address that one quickly before it goes by. Heather's asking, what is a project success template? We have lots of templates, Heather. You can find them on our website. We've got all kinds. We've got kinds that will help you unpack the standards or the alternate standards. We've got lesson plan templates. We've got curriculum mapping templates. We've got all kinds of templates. So I'll make sure to flash our website up here again in a bit so you can find those. Cheryl is saying she'd love to see an example of content connectors that have been unpacked or that you've been working with. We have some of those on the website as well, I believe. Heidi put our website in the chat box. Thanks, Heidi. So just, I guess, with these last couple of minutes, let's maybe address the literacy specifically. What has been your experience as far as literacy or reading? How do you address gaps? How do you address the gaps? And how do you find maybe workarounds, or what accommodations do you put into place? Because for myself, at least, I will say that at least part of this comes to a point where you have to realize that not all students will be able to read independently at grade level. And that's okay. There are adults without identified disabilities that perhaps cannot independently read at their age level or whatever. So how are we going to accommodate that? How are we going to teach students to use strategies to work around that, right? There are many other ways to access text and words and language besides just independently reading words from a book or something like that, right? So so I guess that's a twofold question. How do you address literacy and reading in general, but then also how do you sort of teach those strategies that will help them continue to move forward in their education, even if they're not independently reading on their own?
I'll jump in here on literacy. One of the strategies that we have implemented at our district for all students, not just students with disabilities, but every single student in our district has access to a extension on their Chromebooks called Snap and Read. It's a text reader, so they can read any text on their Chromebooks. So any content is out there that's assigned to them, they can read that. And all students have been shown how to read that K through senior. So all students and staff have access to that. I especially make sure that my students know how to use that. And then my assistants know how to use that so they can assist students that maybe can't independently use that, but they are able to use that within the classroom because all students are accessing that. They can read any text to the student in the gen ed classroom or in the special education classroom.
So Erica, can you Eric wants to know, does Snap and Read the text to them?
Yes, any text. It can read PDFs as well, as long as the PDF is a high quality PDF, because it's interpreting the picture. So
Sure.
It's only as good as the picture is. But it's a universal design for learning strategy that our district has adopted. We also got it through a patents grant to begin with. That's how we started with it, and then our district has continued with it. But then the other way that I have helped with students that have literacy gaps is that we include, and it's not just me, I mean, it's throughout our district, we include visuals with things, and we work on core vocabulary throughout our district. Like if we are consistent and we provide these things, you know, we are very strong between the English language learning department and the special ed department, making sure that we're providing the same strategies so that we're not conflicting and our staff are all getting the same message. You know, we're providing a united front. Strategies are good. The same strategies work for all. You know, if we're sending the same message, the same strategies, the staff aren't feeling overwhelmed that, oh my gosh, you have to do this for this kid and this for that kid and this for this and this for that. You know, like everyone's kind of getting a united picture, and they're like, oh, well, this kid's struggling. Oh, what did they say we could do? You know, oh, this is one little tweak I could do in my lesson, and helps. And sometimes we're providing it, but other times the gen ed teachers are just immediately doing it, and we're like, oh, what did you do? Because that kid wasn't grasping that, and I hadn't gotten down to you to figure out, you know, like what we needed to tweak. And they're like, oh, well, we just did this. And I'm like, oh, perfect, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was a really good point about kind of aligning with your English learners as well. There are a lot of strategies that kind of overlap in that way, and the fact that you all can be consistent is great. I think that's really good. I want to very quickly make sure that I just flip to this next slide about upcoming opportunities from Project Success, as well as getting you the evaluation link. But I also want to make sure that the remaining panelists have a chance to address the literacy question or anything else. So while I show these slides, I'm going to let you all continue to talk, but I just wanted to warn people what's coming up here. Any other thoughts on the literacy before we wrap up here?
One thing, I do teach English to my students, so they are receiving direct instruction from the special education department. Eventually, we would like to start including them in English 9, 10, 11, and 12, but I'm not super staffed either. I'm the only one at the high school that does this job. So that's not something we're quite ready to tackle yet. So they're getting direct instruction through me in the special ed department. And then I just saw Angie put immersive reader. We have introduced that to our students at school. And then our online textbooks from the gen ed classes read to you. And I mean, we
don't discount the availability of the gen ed materials, right? And the accessibility that comes from those, the accessibility features that are available there.
Yep.
That's a big one. Absolutely. Thank you, Jenna. Megan is sharing about her milestone reading series, Brain Spring. That's awesome. Yeah. Again, just to highlight, you know, when we're talking about the importance of inclusion, we're not saying 100% inclusion all the time, no matter what. There's always going to be a need for a continuum of services and situations and circumstances that, you know, students will benefit more from, or it'll be more appropriate for them to be in a setting to get, you know, self-contained direct instruction or something like that. That's okay. But what we are focusing on is always making sure that we don't stay stagnant in thinking that whatever environment our students are in is the appropriate one. If there's a way to make it more inclusive and it is to their benefit and it is less restrictive for them, we want to move them in that direction, especially if it's to their benefit and not about our convenience, right? And our scheduling and our programming and things like that. If a student needs to be exposed to gen ed and involved in gen ed, then that's where they need to be. And we got to figure it out, you know, on our end to make that happen. So let me speak real briefly to these opportunities here. Project Success has some upcoming opportunities for the new school year. We've got a platform called Playbook. This is an online professional development learning platform, and we've got a couple different demos and kickoffs set up there. So if you're interested in that, you can check out those links there to learn more and register for those demos. We also have a new teacher jumpstart that we're really excited to provide in August. So this would be for teachers who are new to special education, new to students with more significant needs, or just new to teaching in general, special education. You can learn more at that link. And then I want to make sure I get this evaluation link out there as well. So you can scan this QR code, you can type in the bit.ly, or we've got a Project Success team member going to put the evaluation link directly in the chat box. Really, really appreciate your feedback on each of these sessions today and tomorrow, if you happen to be joining tomorrow. It will help us improve what we do moving forward. So we really do take your feedback to heart and would appreciate you filling out the evaluation. There's the link in the chat box I see. And then last from me, I promised my email address. So if you have questions, if I talk too fast, if you need me to restate or clarify anything, my email address is up there. Again, our social media handles are there, so you can follow us for more professional development news and updates, training opportunities. We've also got a monthly newsletter you can sign up to that has a lot of that same content. So lots of opportunities there. I sort of finished on time, but not really. I wanted to wrap up to make sure that if y'all are joining a 10 o'clock session Eastern, that you're able to do that. So thank you so much, especially to our panelists today. I think there was a lot of great feedback and input and experiences shared. I really appreciate our panelists for joining us today. Anyone, if you have any questions at all or would like more information, more strategies, more templates, more, anything, check out our website. Check out our social media feeds, email us, we'll get you to where you need to be. So don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much for joining our first session, our kickoff session and panel, and we hope to see you again in the upcoming sessions. Everybody have a great day.